Tops make great toys for kids of all ages, and honestly most adults like them too. This is one that has a little pull string, a few simple turnings, and hours of enjoyment. I've already bandsawed out my blink, glued a waste block to it, and I'm going to mount that in the chuck, gripping the waste block with the chuck. Then use a bowl gouge to round out the edge, make it smooth, completely round. Cutting from the right to the left, rubbing the bevel on the end of the tool. And always check your progress, make sure that you got rid of all your bandsaw marks. Then smooth up the face. Just using the wing of the bowl gouge, drawing from the center outward. Check your progress with a straight edge, just a little lump. Now I'll mark my layout lines. An 1 3/4 on the face, 3/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch on the edge. Now use a square nose scraper. The tool rest positioned below center. Push the tool straight in, parallel to the axis of the lathe, stopping at your pencil lines. It's easier to make small cuts. Looks good. Now use a thin 1/16 inch parting tool to make a groove right here on this shoulder. Then use a detailing scraper to widen that groove. Making the tailstock. Marked the depth of the hole, 7/8 of an inch with a piece of tape, and drill a hole in the center. Sand this side, then flip it over in the chuck. Now I'm going to flip this around in the chuck. I'm going to grab the shoulder, the tenon that I created with the groove in it, with the chuck jaws. Then use a parting tool to part off the waste block. Now the scrap block parted off, I'll use the bowl gouge to smooth up the face again. Just to remove any of that excess glue. Then I'll make a mark right at center. Then use the wing of the bowl gouge. Use the wing of the bowl gouge to turn an angle between the center point and the outer edge. The bevel on the end of the bowl gouge is rubbing against the wood that I'm cutting. The wing is ripping away the waste material. The flute's open to about 45 degrees. And cutting from the center out. Check to make sure that the cone is straight with a straight edge. Just a little crown in the center. Got a good sharp point on it. The tool, lower the tool rest, and make a shear scrape with the wing of the bowl gouge. Just drawing it lightly across the surface, removing any high spots. It's good. I removed the original number 2 style jaws from the chuck and installed a smaller number 1 style jaw that'll grip a smaller diameter piece. I'm going to mount this blank in the jaws here. Use the spindle roughing gouge to turn this end round. Once that end is round, take it out of the chuck and flip it around. Make sure that I've got at least 3 inches protruding from the chuck. And round the other end. And I'm going to take this down to a 5/8 diameter spindle. And transfer my lines around the piece. I'll use a parting tool to turn this first section down to a 1/4 inch spindle to fit inside the hole that we made in the top. Just take small cuts, making the spindle longer with each cut. Until you reach the 3/4 inch line. Make sure that this fits, and it does. Then use a spindle detail gouge to round the end over. Then turn a cove, like scooping sand with the spindle detail gouge, working the left and right sides, back and forth, going deeper and wider. Just make your cuts meet in the middle. Then reduce the diameter of this section to 7/16. Wow, I'm good. Then switch back to the spindle detail gouge. Round this corner over from the pencil line. Then use the parting tool to part on your last line down to about 1/4 inch in diameter. And back to the spindle detail gouge to roll the corner over, forming the top. Go ahead and sand this, cut it off, and do a little hand sanding. Now I've prepared another blank, the same as the other one, except I've drilled a 1/16 inch hole, 1 1/4 inch from the end. I want to make sure and mount this end into the chuck first. Remove the corners with the spindle roughing gouge. Then turn it around. Make sure there's at least 3 inches protruding from the chuck. The hole is now closest to the tailstock end of the lathe. Now I'm going to mark from the hole to the right and left 3/16, 11/16, 15/16, and 1.25 inches. Then transfer those lines around the piece with it spinning. If you have any excess on the end, you can part that off, that last line, 1.25 inches. Line in the end. Use the spindle detail gouge to round over. Then turn both the coves, just as before, like scooping sand. From the right and left, alternate sides, going deeper and wider. I just noticed I made an error when marking my lines, so I double checked them. In fact, I had marked one of them incorrectly. I simply sanded away the incorrect line and remarked it at 11/16. Then I'll use a parting tool to reduce the diameter in the center. Just making light cuts. Perfect. Now round the two corners over of the coves between the pencil line and the cove. Just blending that shape together with the spindle detail gouge. Then use a parting tool to part the end down about 1/4 inch in diameter. And the spindle detail gouge to round the corner over. Sand that on the lathe, cut it off and do a little hand sanding. Ready for finish.